Okay, I want to just address a few quick questions that kind of come up around this time that a few people I'm sure have, or multiple people have. And one of them is about applying for grants as an independent person versus a through a nonprofit. And it's a bit complicated. And I actually wanted to talk with my wife and some other people before answering it to get to kind of think through it a little bit. Generally speaking, I mean, I would just say, yes, you have to go through an organization, some type of nonprofit. Again, a generalization. But I mean, I think it's important to remember that all students through Ball State or other universities are connected to a nonprofit, and therefore could apply, as a student or as a representative of Ball State, and Ball State would help manage the grant. And then also the other component of that is that the nonprofit provides a level of you know, risk avoidance, or helps, with things like covering the budget and things like that. There's some level of like recourse for foundations and sponsors to do that. For the purposes of the class, I think really what a nonprofit does is help with, like, as a sounding board. It helps give you information or ideas. It helps, and then later with components of the grant, like, letters of support, when you have to provide an organizational structure when you get to the management section and you're putting in the organizational structure, you'll have one. You'll have kind of a framework to work from, or at least you can consult people about it. The one exception in terms of applying as an independent person would be fellowships. And there are a number of, I'm familiar with some prestigious fellowships like the Ford Foundation, Spencer Foundation. So a number of organizations that do grants and do funding also do fellowships. And as a Ball State student, for example, you would have the option generally of accepting the fellowship as either an individual person and have the money sent directly to you, or it could be routed through Ball State. And I think there are probably advantages and disadvantages to doing it, one way or the other. But again, that's fellowships, which, I mean, overlaps with grants in a way and could be used potentially to do some projects. So that is an option. But again, and just something to kind of think about. And if someone was interested in doing sort of more of a fellowship, I'd be willing to look at that, and I think that could be a worthy pursuit. But it would be something that would be good to kind of talk about. The other thing that I wanted to address in the video and to try to clarify is the Roof Foundation versus the sponsor. And one, to clarify, the idea of the Roof Foundation is just a made up entity for the purposes of the class. And what I really hope with the class is that, one, you take the grant as serious as possible. Like, you at least think of it as something you would genuinely might want to submit in the future for funding. And I've had a real problem, I think, in the past with students who think, well, this is just imaginary or made up. And then when I'm giving them feedback, I'm coming from the place of, are they learning the skills, that would really help them apply for a grant? And if their mindset is too far that this is just imaginary or made up, I think it just creates some problems. So I'd really suggest sort of taking it as serious as possible. And then two, one of the major skills of grant writing is being able to find opportunities and understanding what it means to align your proposal with that funding agency's kind of mission and this, what they have in mind, essentially. The reason for the Roof Foundation guidelines was because if I just had you actually, find grant opportunities and apply for grants and walk through that process, like, every foundation, generally speaking, has a different set of guidelines and expectations for their proposal. Now, I will say that the format for the class is basically what's found in virtually every standard grant proposal. So they generally always have those elements to them. But for example, some might you might address the sustainability component within the methodology for some foundations, or it's not uncommon now more often for funders to maybe have the budget negotiated after, if the proposal's funded. So anyway, the other thing is that, one agency, one grant opportunity might require a 40-page needs assessment, whereas another requires, a 3-page needs assessment. And if I had you guys, use those different guidelines, you would end up with very different. It would just be hard to grade and to compare and to look at the work of one student in relation to another. So for the purposes of the class, to make it fair and to make sure that all of us go through each process of a grant and come out of the class aware of how to write a grant, to me, it was important to have standard guidelines. So if you look over the guidelines for what I posted on the Roof Foundation, each section, generally, it tends to be around 2 pages. I think sustainability is 1 page and methodology is 3 pages. So you're allotted, a little bit different in some sections, but, needs, goals and objectives, and some of the others tend to be around 2 pages each. And that's so that we're all on the same page. We're all covering things. What I would say is after the class is over, if you want to submit this, I'd be more than happy to help. I'd be more than happy to review the grant. I'm sure people on campus, like it's at the Sponsored Programs Office and elsewhere, would also be willing to help. But then you could, I think you could change it or edit it or align it more with the funding agency's expectations. If you need to, narrow down a section or expand on a section, you would then be able to do that. But anyways, so that's the idea that we actually find a sponsor that we could submit this to, and that's kind of guiding some of the sections of the grant as we write it. But that also we're using the specifications in the Roof Foundation so that we're all submitting, roughly the same amount of work each week. And kind of following along with the same expectations. So I hope that kind of clarifies and sort of makes sense to you guys. If it doesn't, please let me know, send questions. I'd be happy to address them. So hope this was somewhat helpful.